everybody today. I'm beginning to feel like I'm a visitor at times, just being here on Sunday. I've been having to be in Piedmont working on the grandkids' house, trying to get it done. I got a crunch deadline the end of this week. Been putting in the countertops and air conditioning, so I've got a lot that I have to get prepped for that. And I only have a few days to get it done in, so old men don't work quite as fast as they used to. So just bear. But it is good that we can be here today. You turn to number 9, A Beautiful Life. Now, I'll let Ernie go ahead and pick the songs. So, and that's fine. I love this song, but we have a bass part in here, so I may switch parts here from the lead to the bass, so please don't get distracted. But we'll sing the first and fifth verse of number 9, A Beautiful Life. And I forgot to mention, good morning, Tammy. It's good to have you with us this morning. And we know there's probably others, Lavina and Kalita, of members this morning, but we're glad that you're with us. Number 9. Each day I'll do a golden deed, my helping those who are in need. My life on earth is but a stand, and so I'll do the best I can. Life's evening sun is sinking low, a few more days, and I must go to meet the deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun, while going down life's weary road. I'll try to live some travelers low. I'll try to turn the night to day, and flowers bloom along the way. My evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. So much for trying to switch parts. I apologize for that, but you can go to your classes now. It's a thought, and that's what the Lord hears.
Morning. Good to have everybody with us this morning. It's the first day of the week. This morning we're going to continue with our Bible questions and answers we've been doing for a little while now. And we're going to come back to our Did God Create Everything from Nothing? And as we look at this, we barely got into this last week, just a little bit into it. Read a few verses, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to that and remind us of where we were at. I will say this for anybody online with us. I just noticed looking at my phone that the word God, it's kind of getting, I guess, washed out with the white there behind it. But that's what it says. Did God create everything from nothing? And as we looked at this, we've been stating, I wanted to look at this from a class perspective. A lot of times, sometimes this is taught and or lectured-wise and so on, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for questions. And I want to go ahead and leave that room for questions, comments, anything that anybody might have. And when we look at this lesson, in a sense, this class, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at it to realize and show how evolution is not real. I mean, how it's a theory and it's basically fiction in a sense when you really look at it. I will say this, there are two types of evolution. There's macroevolution and microevolution. Macroevolution is meaning that basically something came from nothing on its own, that basically did its own thing, humans, animals, and so on. Where microevolution is true. Microevolution is true. And what I mean by that, usually what it is, it has an easy way to explain it, is we know as humans, say for instance you take antibiotics. If you take an antibiotic for some type of infection or whatever it may be, our body can become resistant to an antibiotic, to certain antibiotics if we take them too often or too much, and so on. And that's what microevolution is, where our body gets used to kind of changes in that sense of understanding. Or same thing with insects or certain pesticides that insects will become, we're basically kind of immune to. It really doesn't bother them anymore. And that's microevolution. Some will say also the sense of tanning. Maybe your body changes colors. We know we can have that happen very quickly during the summertime. And so there's so many different things, the sunburn first, then it tans, or however you look to that. But so I just want us to realize that, because I'm going to mention microevolution in this, that there are the two of them. And macro is completely false, and we'll discuss that. And because we need to know this and understand this, and I'm sure you've discussed it before or had sermons on it and so on, but it's always good to go back to this and remind yourselves and to really think about this and realize, because the world is pushing that God did not create everything. And we think, well, maybe it's not pushing us, but no, it's pushing harder, but in different ways, and trying to remove us from God, from our faith. And this is just part of the whole scheme of the thought and idea of doing that. So by stating that, the first thing, we read this last week, we're going to read it again. I want us to look at Isaiah 45, 9 through 13. And if someone, I'll have a couple slides for this. If someone go ahead and read this for us, please. Isaiah 45, 9 through 13.
Woe to him strive with him who formed him a pot among earthen pots. Does the clay say to him who formed it, what are you making? Or your works has no handles. Woe to him who says to a father, what are you beginning? Or to a woman, with what are you in labor? Thus saith the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, and the one who formed him, ask me of things to come. Will you command me concerning my children and the work of my hands? I made the earth and created man on it. It was my hands that searched out the heavens, and I script out, and I commanded all their hosts. I have stirred up in righteousness, and I will make all his ways level. He shall build my city and set my exile free, not for price or reward, saith the Lord of hosts.
Thank you. So it's pretty clear. God tells Isaiah here, inspires him to write these words, that look, I'm the one that created everything, including man, beast, everything you think about. Anything that's out there, he goes, I did it. When he said I created the world and the hosts are considered stars, sun, moon, all other planets, and so on, as he describes this here. So without a doubt, we see that God does tell us, he explains that he has created everything, and we read that in the scriptures, but the question once again comes back to, did God create these things out of nothing? Did he really do this? Well, the best way to understand this is to go back to the ancient language that we mentioned last week in the Hebrew. When we look at the ancient language in Hebrew, we have two words for creation, only two. That's all that's used in the whole Hebrew language and what we see written here in the scriptures. And the first of that is asa. And when we see this, it refers to what we do with our talents. You may be a very talented person in sewing, in cooking, and maybe carpentry, in many different art, whatever it may be, different things, and writing poems or poetry, whatever it is. And when we think about those things, it's something that's what we already have. Like we have wood to do carpentry, we have thread to do sewing, and so on. And we have those. So we're already taking those and we're making something out of the things that we already have. That's what this word asa is, or asa, as we would understand with our talents. So there's a big difference between making something out of something than there is making something out of nothing. So this is the first word that's used. And it is used throughout the Hebrew Bible. We see the Old Testament Bible, talking about things that were made out of other people's talents, which brings us to the next one. This is the second one, the only other one. And the word here is bara or bara, that is used in connection with God. It is the creation of something from nothing. That's what this word means. Or in another way to look at it, to create something that never existed before. And brethren, when we look at this, we go, okay, these two words make sense. It's either going to be one or the other. Well, when we're looking at God in Isaiah, when we said the word created there, he used the word bara. And without a doubt, and the same all throughout the Bible, whenever he talks about the world, humans, when he talks about different things, this is where he gets to. Genesis chapter 1 account, the whole time it's bara there that we see of what he created. So as we look at those, as we think about this, don't think that the created can mean anything. It doesn't. It either means one of these two words, and the words we're going to be looking at dealing with this is bara. So think about this, Romans chapter 4. We also mentioned this. Romans chapter 4, verse 17, as we see Paul, inspired by God, writes these words to the Roman Christians. And this is what he states. If someone read this for us, please.
As it is written, I have made you the father of many nations, in the presence of the God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead, and calls into existence the things that do not exist.
Thank you. So here the word existence is translated from the Hebrew to the Greek, and using that word of understanding of bara. And so he makes it very clear. It says, and calls into existence the things that do not exist. What does that mean? If you call something, you call something into existence that never existed before, what does that mean?
You created
Something from nothing, right? I mean, without a doubt. And that's that bara, that word that we see there that comes about and lets us understand. So God calls into being what did not exist. And what we need to understand some things. A lot of times we only think about it as being objects, things. God says, no, that's not the case. It's not just things. It's not just a human. It's not just a tree. It's not just a plant. It's not just an earth. It's not just a planet or a star or, whatever you want to say, water. He goes, there are other things too. And he brings out that's not objects. And he shows us this in Exodus chapter 34, verse 10. A great example of this and something else that he created. Someone go ahead and read this for us, please.
And he said, behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels, such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you.
Thank you. So here God's saying that he can do marvels, he can do, miracles, do things that has never been seen before on the earth. To raise somebody from the dead, it's like that hadn't happened before. We see that God is able to have that happen. Christ is able to do it. We see others, and that we see that understanding. A really easy way to think about it, too, is something that hadn't been seen, is, we mentioned this, and this is where we got to one verse after this, and actually I don't have it up yet. It was number 16, verse 30. Where God was, the people had done wrong, and God said, I'm going to open up a hole in the ground and swallow people up, and it's going to close back up. I mean, imagine this. Some people say, well, that was just an earthquake. I understand what we want to think that way, but God said, made it very clear, this is what this was. Someone go ahead and read this for us. Number 16, verse 30, please.
But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord.
Thank you. So here, if the Lord creates something new, this word creates once again is bara, is what we see in the Hebrew, giving the example of. So as we look at this, we notice that in the creation account, we understand what was made and what wasn't made, or basically what came from nothing, as God talks about. And there's three main things when we really mention this of what came from God that never existed before. And we get it from that first verse in Genesis chapter 1:1, where it says there in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And remember this, when we talk about heavens, when the plural gives a plural, a lot of times this will be confusing to people. They'll be like, whoa, so there's more than one heaven where God is? What's going on here? Anybody know what this is? I've mentioned it a few times. How many are there?
Three.
Three. What are they?
heaven, well, the atmosphere, and then, let's see, the heavens are the third where God lives.
Yep.
And in the sky is one.
And then
And
space.
you'll have to help me.
Space. Space where we see where we go, where there is no oxygen,
Yeah.
no atmosphere, anything. It's exactly right. So when the Jews would look up, they realized, hey, here's heaven, here's the sky, and then there's the second heaven where the stars are and other planets and so on, and then the third heaven is where God resides. And so that's why you see whenever it would be translated, they would translate as heavens, and God even telling you that, basically showing that I didn't just create the sky above you. I didn't just create the space above you. I just didn't create where I'm at. Think about all this God has done. So what do we learn from this? This is what we get in creation. We get number one, time. Time was created. There was not time, we see, because he says in the beginning. In other words, what I mean by time was created, man hasn't made a decision, oh, we're going to go ahead and start telling time. No, that's not the case at all. We understand that God makes it very clear, as we see translated in the in the Hebrew language, there in Genesis 1, about 24-hour periods coming about each day and more, each night, day and night, we see coming about. Number two, space. That's where the heavens were we talked about. There's space that things are residing in. And then finally, number three, matter, which would be the earth. And so we see these three things being there, and God, bringing these about. And we have to see these three before we move into anything else. And we see this had never been. It wasn't so let me ask you this before I get you down real quick. If people say it was the Big Bang Theory, say that was real popular in the 70s and some in the 80s, it's still used occasionally, not as much now, because it's kind of been blown away, kind of pushed out, just showing it's just a theory. But if the Big Bang Theory is real, there had to already exist what?
Matter.
Matter. There had to have been something, and there had to have been space for this to happen. And we see for it to happen, actually, when you really think about it, there had to be time. None of that was there. Say, wait a minute, if that's the case, how did that happen? That didn't happen. Now, God could have said, I'm going to start creating things, and I'll do with a Big Bang. He doesn't tell us that. He tells us how He's created. And this is always very important to understand when God said He created things when it comes to matter of the earth. Because a lot of people get confused with it. They go, well, this timetable, it looks like this rock is millions of years older than this rock. When God created everything on earth, how did He create it? Did He create everything as new babies, little things growing tiny out of the seed? Sure. How did He create it? Mature, fully grown, completely. Don't know how old they may look. Because we know when man was created, how was he created? As a child, a baby? No. And all the animals He created, God shows He created them, and they had to be able to do what? They had to procreate, find things to eat and procreate and so on. And we see that. So it's really important to get that thought as we go through something like this, looking to that. Go ahead.
It's interesting. Science says that, there is no God. But yet, three of what you have up there is part of scientific fact. The only one that's missing that normally I would put up there, but that's me, would be a D, force, God. Time, space, matter, and force. Those are four elements that science says you have to have.
You have to have to make anything.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and that's what's interesting when you look at this, where, science will say that things came from that, but they cannot explain how those things came along. And then others will say, well, you can't explain where God came from. And I will say, well, God always was. They go, well, so was our thing. No, it wasn't. You're saying it boom, it came about like that. Big difference. And we have eternal proof. It's amazing the proof, the evidence that we can show, external and eternal in the Bible and external outside of the Bible. And, every time man gets farther and farther trying to prove things, it's remarkable how much it actually proves what? The Bible. And that's just great. That's God using His guidance, using His, everything about Him, saying, I told you so. I mean, and what we see here. So as we think about these things, think about this verse here. Genesis chapter 1, we get to it. Genesis chapter 1, verse 21. God created living creatures, life. So I'm going to read this one. Got this cute little seal here, seal line. They're not cute. They're cute, but they're not nice. So we're going to read that for us, please.
So God created the great seas, creatures and everything, living creatures that moves, with which the waters swarm according to his kind, and God saw that it was good.
Thank you. So now I'm using this one, we're like, why did we go to something else? Why do we have to use this one? I want to go to the things that were created in water because, and we'll get to this a little more as we go through this. Evolution says that we came from a pool of warm water. That's what it says, in a sense. Came from a pool of water, you know, like a little pollywog in a sense. You know, a little thing that is just there. You know, after millions of them jumped, one finally made it. And then it just kept deciding to grow and decided to move a little more, you know. And then one came from that. We're like, wait a minute, whoa, how did that one make another one by itself? What's going on here? And, you know, and we see all this. And, you know, one thing about evolution, they need a lot of what to try to prove their theory, which they've never done and they never will do. They have to have a lot of what? Time. I'll say this, it amazes me. I know when we lived in Virginia, up near D.C., when we were there the first time, which was in 2002, we were there, I took the teenagers to the Smithsonian. We went to the Smithsonian, and we were there and we were looking at the timetable that they showed for dinosaurs and humans and everything. And it's like, okay, you have all this here and so on. And I know that I'd read about it years before, and I was like, wait a minute, that timetable looks different from what I'd read a long time ago. It seems like it's more. And I was like, oh, well, blew it off, kind of went about. And then when we moved back to our second time, went up to the Smithsonian again. And guess what they had done again? Changed the timetable. They have to keep changing it because when things start proving out, they need more time. They need more and more and more and more and more time to try to prove it. And when we see that, brethren, there's a change, what we find. God's Word has not had to change to try to fit our society or fit our timetable. Never has. Never will. Genesis 1:27. Everyone notice this verse. Someone go ahead and read this for us, please.
So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
Thank you. So here's what we find here is a spiritual being in a physical body. That's what God's talking about here. Because I've had some tell me, go, Ernie, I look nothing like you. How can we say we're created by God? It's our spiritual body. We all have the same spiritual being in a sense from what God talks about and what he explains in that sense. So as we look at this is what I want to get about. This is where it's all going to get to talk about this. God created, everything from nothing. Is that everything else, when we find after this, after everything was created by God, everything else was in a sense a repackaging of existing things and ideas. That's where you get to your other word we see there of this end. But even that is beyond comprehension. It's hard for us to explain how those things even happen. So let's see what we find out. When we talk about animals, when we talk about, let me start, we talk about insects, when we talk about animals, when we talk about humans, we talk about, the herbs of the ground, we talk about, the trees, we talk about the grass, whatever it is, everything that's out there. We need to realize that God made things to reproduce always after its what? Its own kind. Very important to get that thought in your head. Its own kind. God made that clear and showed us that through scriptures, and he talks about it. And it makes perfect sense when we today, and we look back in history, we see who's coming from who, or what is coming from what. It makes sense. Brethren, we have history back, way back. And we would ask, actually, with the Bible, we have history back at the beginning of time. But you start looking at this and you ask yourself, where do we see ever something different coming from something that was not its own? We don't. We never see that. Anything you see on evolution posters, that you see in science, you see in schools, that talk about, that talk about things coming from different things, that is just their thought. That's their theory. They have no evidence whatsoever. As much as they try to figure a way to prove it, they can't. And I'll show you what they do, what is done. They do just the opposite to try to prove it. And we'll explain as we get a little farther into this, dealing with a child's fiction book that really brings the existence understanding the exact same way evolution tries to work. So as we look at this, let's go to Genesis chapter 1. God made things reproduce after its own kind. Let's see what the Bible says about this and how God didn't just make this up or humans come around later and write this, but God actually had these words put in there to explain that. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading for us. Let me see. I forgot something. Let me just say this. We need to understand before I get into this, that with this being the case coming from one of its own kind, this does not eliminate variations within its kind. So if you have a dog, what can come from, or you say you have a coyote or we say, I don't know, a wolf or something, what can come from that kind? Canine is basically, in a sense, they look the same in a change. Variations, that's exactly right. So variation is what allows us to adapt to differences in environment. But evidence of one kind becoming something different never existed and won't. Let's go and read this. Oops, someone, what do that for? That's weird. So I'm going to go ahead and read that for us, please. Verse 11, and I'll have 12 right after it.
Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, a herb that yields seed, and the fruit trees that yield fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so.
So before we go to verse 12 there, think about this for a moment. So it says here, it's talking about the fruit tree that yields fruit according to what? The herb that yields a seed to its what?
Its kind.
Its own kind. So can a tree become a human? Can a tree become an insect? Can a tree become a caterpillar? Can a tree become an animal? No. None whatsoever. Now seed, here's what's interesting. Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind. When it says fruit, what's in the fruit? Seeds. So does an apple tree make an orange tree? Now man is taking seeds and putting them together. Notice what they're doing here. Now they're taking a talent, creating something that already exists and trying to make something of it. And trying to change it up a little bit to taste different. Has anybody ever put, peppers next to another vegetable, drawn them right next to each other? Anybody ever done that with jalapenos or something? And what happens to that vegetable usually right next to it? It gets a little bit of spice to it. You're like, look what I created out of nothing. No, you didn't. No, we understand it. Number one, you probably never meant for it to do that. And number two, it's created out of this one thing from another. It's nothing new. And so we see that. And I just want us to get that as we think about that, which brings us to verse 12. Let me see here. Verse 12. Go ahead, verse 12.
And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the trees that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Thank you. So here is that the same verse?
No.
Did I put the wrong verse in there?
No.
Nope, okay. I just did it twice. I was like, what did I do that? No, so as we see this, once again, its kind, oh, and it's very simple to see that as it comes about. Let's do Genesis 1:21. So I'm going to read this for us, please. Genesis 1:21.
So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Thank you. Once again, birds after birds, and animals after animals in the water. We see so on. And then it goes a little bit further, 24 to 25. If someone go ahead and read this for us, please.
Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to his kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Thank you. You know what's kind of interesting here? Why did God have to make sure when he had this Hebrew words of Genesis written by Moses to write it down? Why do you think God made sure he put its kind in there? Why didn't he just say, God made the beasts of the earth, made cattle, everything that creeps on the earth. God saw that it was good. Why didn't he just do that? I mean, they didn't have this kind of problem back then. Well, why did he do it?
Everything has its purpose. God likes order.
God likes order, without a doubt. We see that it has purpose. You think God knew the way humans would think?
Sure.
Do you think God knew what he needed to put in there to show people that, look, this didn't just come by itself? It was created from me, without a doubt. Jesus, we know, we read all about the Bible, that he read the what of men? Their hearts, their minds, exactly, all the time. And we see that. God knew what humans were going to do. He knew what he had to put in there. But at the same time, he wanted to show you that, look, these things just didn't come by accident. I specifically made them in order. It's exactly right. God has always done things in decent and order in a sense, as we see the order that is there, that is found in it. And so that's what we see described. So, unlike the unproven claims of evolutionists, the Bible states each kind of creature reproduces to produce more of the same kind. Same kind. That's what we find. So now think about the variation stuff I said a moment ago. So here's we look at this. The problem, as when all this comes about, is the one of design, with evolutionists versus creation. And design is very important. God has designed different animals different ways, designed different creatures after different creatures, insects and so on, but they understand that they would bring on their own kind. I think a very interesting one, and this is an animal that is used because evolutionists will use this and they'll run with this bird as much as they can. And it's not that it's different from other birds or different ducks, or however to me it's more like a duck, or a geese or a goose. And but it's not that what they're really doing. It's showing they said this animal changed over time to be able to do something that it needed to do. So as I illustrate this, here it is. This is called, well, where we I already said this. Okay. Get out of here. All right, there we go. Anybody know what this animal's called?
Loon.
Ooh, I heard it, a loon. Exactly right. So this is a loon. This loon is duck in a sense, but it's not really a duck. I mean, it's not, and we see this bird. This loon is able to dive up to 200 feet. Rather than it could dive underwater to 200 feet to catch a fish. That's what it does. Even ducks and geese can't do this. Some, ducks can go down just a tiny bit and come right back up, we see, is what happens. Have you ever noticed when a duck goes underwater, when it comes back up, it's not like a human just kind of coming out of the water. What does it seem like it does? Just kind of pops up. I mean, just pops up. Kind of like a bobber. You know, when you have a bobber and it goes underwater and the fish releases it, what does that bobber do? Boom, boom, like that. Exactly right. And if you've ever seen a duck, that's exactly what they do too, and there's a reason behind that. And we'll look at that. So here it is. The ducks and geese, they can't do this because they have what's their bones. Guess what they are? They are hollow. Their bones are hollow. Just like all of the birds. Loons, though, guess what they have? They're more like a mammal. They have solid bones. Solid bones. Evolutionists would claim that loons changed, this is remarkable, changed over time because they were trying to catch fish. That their bones had to go from being hollow to solid because they just couldn't seem to catch enough fish. Or couldn't catch fish at all. But note this. Don't other birds, ducks, geese, survive just fine without needing to dive so deep? Do they not? Without a doubt they do. If diving deep is required, then the other species should have what? Either two things. Changed or, exactly right, died off. That's what should have happened. It isn't just the bone structure, though, what's interesting about these animals is different. The muscles are different, the ligaments are different, and other tissues have to also change because the bones are different. The DNA sequence of a loon structure is vastly different from that of other birds. It isn't that just a few small changes came into place. And I think it's always interesting. Evolutionists will say that about the duck having to do that to dive. And I always wonder, why did they just say that the loon changed from from an actual duck, or from whatever they say. They said that only this one specific animal. My question is, if it had those type of bones at one time and it changed for this, why aren't other ducks or birds changed? Because you think this one by itself is the only one that, I need to do this to get the fish? Once again, we say no. Could have still fed fish. See, brother, design means that there's a purpose. It's a coordinated set of choices made to accomplish a set task. This goes back to design. This comes back to design in order that we talk about with God. So let me show you what time is it? Okay, I got 2 more minutes. Let me show you how to explain evolution. This is the best way to explain it. And it's from a child's book. I don't know how many have ever heard of this book before, by Rudyard Kipling. Anybody hear this book before? It's not a new book or anything like that. It's called The Elephant's Child. And when you think about this, you go, okay, where's the elephant's child? What's happening here? It's a fictional description of how the elephant got its long trunk. Of how it got its trunk. You notice in the picture, what's different about this elephant here from all other elephants you've ever seen? Doesn't have a trunk. So we're going, well, I guess it's putting it in its mouth. It's tucking it in its mouth or something. I don't know. No, it's not, it doesn't have a trunk. So what we find here in the book is that originally we were told elephants had short noses. We were told short noses. But one day, a young elephant got too close to the river and was attacked by a crocodile, biting the elephant on the nose, and the crocodile tried to pull him, as we see, into the river. And guess what happened? There was the nose. Got a long, long nose. As the elephant pulled back, his nose stretched until it became the trunk we see today. Brethren, of course, this is fiction. This is a fictional book. But this is exactly how evolution is described. The exact same way. Here it is. A need is presented, and then somehow organisms gain the ability to fit that need. That's what evolution does. God doesn't work like that. God doesn't look for a need that's presented and then figure out a way to describe it. God gives us the description of what's actually there and what it's become. Just think about giraffes. Giraffes got long necks. Guess what we're told? The reason they got long necks was to reach leaves. Well, that's kind of crazy. You think there's only trees that high? I mean, I've seen trees touching all the way to the ground. I got a huge magnolia tree in my front yard out here on the farm, and it's swooping all over the ground. Trees do that. Humans, they say, got lighter or darker skin depending on how their ancestors spent in the sun. In 1893, on 1 minute, 1893, German biologist August Weismann cut the tails off mice for generation after generation after generation. Guess what happened? Guess what happened one day? Oh, a mouse was born without a tail. No, never happened. Never happened. Mice are still born today, guess what? With a tail. I don't know if anybody remembers back in the 70s, I remember being told by a science teacher that over time our little tiny toe would disappear. I went, what? He said, your little tiny toe would disappear. Because you notice what it does? It just sits there and it's good for nothing. And I'm like, wow, I'm still waiting. I mean, that was in 3rd grade. I'm still waiting. It's never happened. I ain't even heard of anybody lose part of it. I mean, it's still there. You think at least the toenail would be gone by now. I mean, but this is what I'm trying to point out. Those things don't happen. They take a need and they try to give an explanation to it. There's no need to have your little toe, so it's going to be gone. Brethren, it's never happened, and it never will. Humans were born with 5 toes on each side. What is it? That's whole in the way God would expect it, not from a disease or something like that. And so all 5 on each, and that's the way it is. And that's the way we see it. So that's it for this morning. We'll talk a little bit next week about the survival of the fittest and seeing where evolution try to play a role in that, where they say only the fittest survive. Well, that's kind of crazy, what we've seen in time. So, but I appreciate their thought to see if that's really real, and we'll show what the Bible says about it. Any comments, questions before we close? I got a couple. Sorry, here we're going back to
Just
Jeff.
one, the question still needs to be proposed to the scientists. Why isn't evolution being seen today
Yeah.
if it is something that is fact and not a theory?
That's exactly right. It should be continuing if that's the case. Anything that changed, that they say changed to something else, it should still be happening. Time, it doesn't look because, oh, now we're in the 21st century, it just doesn't have to happen. I don't think about that. No, go ahead.
Well, even now, as much as science has, as much as they do right now, there are things that happen. There are frogs that are born with 7 or 8 toes, or 3 arms and 2 legs. There's snakes that are born with 2 heads. There are children that are born misshapen. But the frogs are still frogs.
Right.
Even though they have 6 toes or whatever. The snake with 2 heads is still a snake. And the child that is born misshapen is still a child. They're not some kind of animal that has evolved from a human or a snake or a frog. They're still an animal that was made like that.
That's exactly right. We can't just say a variation like that changes the organism of what's there, and it doesn't. And like I said, we had a cat one time, a little kitten, and when the first time we noticed, like, oh, it's got 6 toes on one hand. We got a different kind of cat than anybody else. And no, still a cat, but like I said, just had 6 toes. And, or claws, I guess however you want to say it. But that is so true. So God made, not creature self-regenerated. That's what we need to think. God made, not creature self-regenerated. And when we think about it that way, we understand without a doubt that God is who He says He is. And it's really easy to prove evolution wrong. It's been done forever. I mean, it's been done for so long. And it's just scientists don't want to accept it because it makes it no longer something they can do. That it takes away so much when you take away evolution. All right, any other comments, questions? We're over time a little bit. Anybody else? No? Okay, we'll go ahead and end there. Thank you.
Okay,